The exhibition of freaks, monstrosities or marvels of nature were essential components of traveling exhibitions in Europe and America throughout the Victorian period. What was saleable as far as the freak was concerned was, of course, physical difference in a form that was both marketable and palatable. The showman was an essential component, and it was the relationship between the presenter and the exhibit that produced a freak show. The exhibit could not be seen before a show and therefore needed the showman to market their particular attractions to the curiosity-seeking public. An essential part of the telling of the tale consisted of wonderfully and medically impossible reasons to explain to the audience the history of the person they were going to see. The most popular attractions were oddities with extraordinary talents who could do supposedly normal things despite their disabilities. A famous example of this type of act and sort were Siamese twins, so called because of Chang and Eng. The original twins were born in Siam in 1811 and brought to America in 1829. Midgets were frequently advertised as being much older than they actually were. Hirsute or bearded attractions would range from Jojo the dog-faced boy and the famous fake show Harry Mary from Borneo, which was in reality a monkey. Hirsute-faced ladies were a common feature in the 19th century, and famous names included Leonine the lion-faced lady, Alice Bounds the bear lady, and Annie Jones, who appeared with Barnum and Bailey's Circus. The fairground created a world of extremes where largeness in size, hairiness in body, and the more miniature or large the stature was celebrated and sought after. This reversal of the norms in fashion and bodily perfection is never more exemplified than in the case of Mary Ann Bevan, the ugliest woman in the world, who was a star for many years at Pickard's Grand Panopticon in Glasgow and also appeared with Tom Norman until she presented her own show on the traveling fairs. According to Tom Norman, Mary Ann's features became so deformed after the shock of seeing her husband drop dead at her feet just as he was entering the front door of their cottage. Mary Ann Bevan continued to appear on the fairgrounds until the 1930s and threatened legal action against any act daring to say she was uglier than herself. Her career as a sideshow curiosity was immensely profitable, and during a 4-week stay in Glasgow in 1920 the show brought in £662 6d on the door and a further £48 from the selling of 5,000 postcards and 6333 books. Other 19th century exhibits included Patrick O'Brien the Irish Giant, a regular act at St. Bartholomew's Fair, and Sam Taylor the Ilkeston Giant. Examples of physical extremities included the Fat Boy of Peckham and Sacco Hum and the famous Fasting Man, and such was the popularity of fat women shows that 5 alone could be found at Hull Fair, the largest traveling fair in the United Kingdom in the 1890s. The presentation of human oddities in the Victorian era changed dramatically with P.T. Barnum and his famous attraction Tom Thumb. When Barnum arrived in England in 1844, the British showmen were amazed that he was hoping to attract so much money for simply exhibiting at Wharf. Midgets had appeared on traveling fairs for hundreds of years. Thomas Frost in his account of Bartholomew Fair cites many examples of this activity, and Simon Pop was presented to Prince Regent in 1815 and was a famous attraction at Bartholomew Fair. However, Barnum in the shape of Tom Thumb created a novelty act that became one of the greatest attractions of the Victorian era. Barnum's talents lay in his ability to create fantasy out of nothing, and with the creation of his American Museum and the exhibiting of the Fiji Mermaid, the famous What Is It and Joyce Heth the 161-year-old nurse of George Washington, his talents as a showman were without equal. In spite of this, the discovery or creation of Tom Thumb surpassed all of his previous achievements and profits. Barnum created a novelty act that would become one of the greatest attractions of the Victorian era. Charles Stratton, or Tom Thumb, was 11 years old when first exhibited by Barnum in 1843. Barnum changed his nationality from American to English, he changed his age from 4 to 11 years old, and his name from Charles Stratton to General Tom Thumb. When he left the States for his European tour, he became an instant attraction and was presented to Queen Victoria on 3 separate occasions. The effect of Barnum on the English showman and the public was immense, and freak exhibits spread across a range of exhibitions including shop fronts, penny gaffs, music halls, and traveling fairs. Fairgrounds appear to be the main venue for such novelties, but the growth of the music hall and shop front show or penny gaffs provided additional outlets. Dwarf and midget exhibitors such as Major Mite, Harold Pyatt, the English Tom Thumb, and Anita the Living Doll followed in the example of Charles Stratton and became highly successful sideshow novelties operating on the fairs and the music halls. Midgets were presented in stylized format with the items of everyday domesticity such as tables, chairs, and wardrobes acting as props to add to the contrast in size. They were the most prized of all the fairground exhibitions, and Harold Pyatt, who exhibited until the 1920s, would challenge anyone to produce a man as small as himself. By the 1930s, midget shows, or Lilliputian wonders as they were advertised, were all the rage, and midget strong men, midget daredevil drivers and midget conjurers all would appear as a League of Nations under the same show. Two latter-day midgets were Davy the Irish Leprechaun, who exhibited in the 1960s, and Johnny Osborne the Wee McGregor, who continued appearing at Newcastle in the 1980s. Since the introduction of the welfare state, economic necessity was no longer a factor in freak show exhibition. However, both Davy and Johnny expressed a desire to be exhibited on the fairground. Many of the shows that appeared during the reign of Victoria were quickly superseded by the latest novelty or wonder of the age. However, the waxworks display with the freak show was perhaps the most continually popular traveling type of exhibition in the 19th century. Tom Norman, the Silver King, was the English counterpart of Barnum. He exhibited his performers in shop fronts, on his traveling fair, or acted as an agent for the acts and booked them in venues such as the Panopticon in Glasgow and Nottingham Goose Fair, or his Penny Gaff in Croydon. Norman started his career as a sideshow exhibitor in the 1870s when he managed Eliza Jenkins the Skeleton Woman, the Balloon-Headed Baby, and a whole range of freak show attractions. However, as he stated in his autobiography, you could indeed exhibit anything in those days. Yes, anything from a needle to an anchor, a flea to an elephant, a bloater you could exhibit as a whale. It was not the show, it was the tale that you told. By 1883, Norman came into contact with Joseph Merrick the Elephant Man, perhaps one of the most famous exhibits of the time. Tom Norman's career continued after the Elephant Man, and over the next 10 years he became involved with managing Mary Ann Bevan the World's Ugliest Woman, John Chambers the Armless Carpenter, and Leonine the Lion-Faced Lady. Freaks shows were also essential components of circus shows in America, such as the Ringling Brothers' Barnum and Bailey's Sideshow. These stars were immortalized in Todd Browning's 1932 film Freaks, which featured Daisy and Violet Hilton, Johnny Eck, Prince Randy in the Living Torso, and Harry Earl the Midget who falls in love with Cleopatra the trapeze artist. Performing animals were also exhibited alongside the same lines as the human exhibits, with extreme size being desirable features or the perfection of the miniature. In the case of the flea circus, the show itself could be seen as either a performance show, with others believing it to be an optical illusion operated by the showman. Flea circuses died out on the fairground due to a shortage of human fleas necessary for the operation of the show, but its history as a sideshow attraction dates back to the early 1800s. The last 30 years has seen the eventual disappearance of the fairground show. Living novelty acts continued on carnivals and midways in America and on the traveling fairs in the United Kingdom for most of the 20th century. Tommy Twinkle Toes Jacobson the Armless Wonder was a headline attraction on Variety Hall and traveling shows, and Hal Denver, the son of Tom Norman, appeared with his knife-throwing act on The Ed Sullivan Show in America. However, for the British sideshow performers, their heyday was the Victorian period, when the performers were household names and patronized by the general public and royalty alike.